Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spectre here for another edition of Midnight Rider. Tonight we have episode 27. We're going to talk a little bit about the big tech fallout, what's been going on with the Twitters, the Facebooks, the Parlers, the Gabs, etc., etc. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the push for the GOP to censure and where that's leading as opposed to impeachment. If that's still going to take place, who knows? And of course, we're going to get into a little bit of the GOP's emergency declaration and what that means here in the coming weeks as well. So, stick around. We'll see you back here on the other side. These social media platforms are hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. Has been a PSA by Break. Alright, welcome back everybody. It has been quite a bang-up day here in terms of comms. If you have been online today and had issues getting on some of these platforms, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. So the first thing I'm probably going to lead off with tonight is some of the stuff out of Down Detector. No real article, but a lot of stuff going on here today. Google had issues. First thing this morning, we had issues with the brokerage houses, TD Ameritrade, E-Trade, and that behind the scenes. So if you had problems doing a little bit of trading, also by way of the mobile carriers, T-Mobile, Sprint, as well as Metro PCS, all having issues today. Twitch had its issues of its own. Then we scroll down later in the day. Google still had some problems late today. WebEx, Cloudflare, a lot of the DDoS type protection and that a lot of sites and that have also having issues about 7 o'clock Eastern time this evening. And of course Coinbase and a couple others here as of late as well. And it's wreaked a lot of havoc, obviously. And tonight I will not be on Tiger Network for that very reason, because I can't get connected. And we'll get the episode and that back up there uploaded once we're set and ready to go. That being said, let's jump into it tonight. Start off with the Parler business and where that is going. Out of the Hill today, Parler sues Amazon, asks court to reinstate platform. This after midnight this morning. The Parler platform and that was deplatformed. And of course, the fallout is that Parler thinks that they were wronged, and probably they were. So we'll see if they get back in court and whether or not they're going to get stood back up on another provider shortly. Social media company Parler sued Amazon on Monday, alleging that its suspension from Amazon's hosting service violated antitrust law and breached the company's contractual arrangement. In its lawsuit, Parler, which is especially popular among conservatives, asked a federal judge to order that the platform be reinstated online. The 18-page complaint, filed in U.S. District Court in Seattle, where Amazon is headquartered, accuses Amazon Web Services of applying a politically motivated double standard to Parler in contrast to its treatment of the more mainstream social media giant Twitter. AWS's decision to effectively terminate Parler's account is apparently motivated by political animus. The lawsuit reads, it is also apparently designed to reduce competition in the microblogging services market to the benefit of Twitter. Multiple legal experts told The Hill that Parler's antitrust claim was unlikely to succeed. The lawsuit does not establish that Parler's suspension was part of an agreement between Amazon and Twitter, the rival social media company that Parler identified as the beneficiary of its shutdown. On the antitrust side, it's pretty weak, said Eric Hovenkamp, a law professor at the University of Southern California. The biggest flaw in the complaint by far is really just that it doesn't allege facts that would indicate a conspiracy between Amazon and Twitter. Yeah, right. No collusion whatsoever, I'm sure. The lawsuit comes a day after Amazon suspended Parler, citing concerns it could not adequately screen out potentially incendiary content, including material that incites violence. It also follows Wednesday's deadly Trump-inspired insurrection at the U.S. Capitol that left 5 people dead. The app saw a massive surge in users between the mob attack at the Capitol and when it was pulled down from Amazon Web Services. And Parler saw approximately 825,000 installs from the Apple and Google stores between Wednesday and Sunday, a more than 1,000% increase from the same period a week earlier, according to data from Censure Tower shared with The Hill. So I'll just break from that there and say, yeah, right, the double standards and that, and the fact that all of these platforms, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, every damn one of them is guilty of incendiary and violent and BS. So give me a frickin' break. We've been down this path before, 2+ years ago with Gab for one incident, the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. We've been down it before. If anything, Parler should have been more prepared for what would have come anyway. So, nonetheless, we continue, and we get this. Every deleted Parler post, many with users' location data, has been archived. So apparently we got some bad actors who decided, hey, let me see if I can find a backdoor into the app here. And lo and behold, guess what? They downloaded everything. Going to be more to say about that here momentarily. Says in the wake of the violent insurrection, I love how they label this insurrection, but hey, never mind the fact what BLM, Antifa, and everybody around all the blue cities last summer were. Well, those were just classified as, quiet protests or friendly whatever. Ridiculous. At the U.S. Capitol by scores of President Trump's supporters, a lone researcher began an effort to catalog the posts of social media users across Parler, a platform founded to provide conservative users a safe haven for uninhibited, quote-unquote, free speech, but which ultimately devolved into a hotbed of far-right conspiracy theories, unchecked racism, and death threats aimed at prominent politicians. How dare you get away from the groupthink at Twitter and our fact-checkers, you buffoons? The researcher, who asked to be referred to by her Twitter handle at DonkNB, began with the goal of archiving every post from January 6th, the day of the Capitol riot, what she called a bevy of very incriminating evidence, according to the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. And I'll pause there and say that should tell you everything. Atlantic Council, who are the actors that sit on that think tank, among other sources. Parler is one of several apps used by the insurrections to coordinate their breach of the Capitol in a plan to overturn the 2020 election results and keep Donald Trump in power. 5 people died in the attempt. Hoping to create a lasting public record for future researchers to sift through, at DonkNB began by archiving the posts from that day. The scope of the project quickly broadened, however, as it became increasingly clear that Parler was on borrowed time. Apple and Google announced that Parler would be removed from their app stores because it had failed to properly moderate posts that encouraged violence and crime. The final nail in the coffin came Saturday when Amazon announced it was pulling Parler's plug. Yeah, probably had a little help from somebody named Michelle Obama, I'm sure. But hey, what do we know? In an email first obtained by BuzzFeed News, Amazon officials told the company they planned to boot it from its cloud hosting service, Amazon Web Services, saying it had witnessed a steady increase in violent content across the platform. It's clear that Parler does not have an effective process to comply with the AWS terms of service, the email read. Operating on little sleep, at DonkNB began the work of archiving all of Parler's posts, ultimately capturing around 99% of its content. In a tweet early Sunday, @DonkNB said she was crawling some 1.1 million Parler video URLs. These are the original, unprocessed RAW files as uploaded to Parler with all associated metadata, she said. Included in this data tranche, now more than 56 terabytes in size, @DonkNB confirmed that the raw video files include GPS metadata pointing to exact locations of where the videos were taken. So there you have that. And she later shared a screenshot showing the GPS position of a particular video with coordination in latitude and longitude. The privacy implications are obvious, but the copious data may also serve as a fertile hunting ground for law enforcement. Federal and local authorities have arrested dozens of suspects in recent days accused of taking part in the Capitol riot, where a Capitol police officer, Brian Sicknick, was fatally wounded after being struck in the head with a fire extinguisher. And of course, this thing goes on, but no real point in doing that, because at the end of the day, hey, where are all the folks net who processed all this for Signal? You know, that little app that all the Antifa type and BLM folks net used. Where are the tranches of data on that? Anyone? Crickets? Crickets? I'll wait for it. And by the way, when you do, make sure that the FBI and your local PDs get a nice little copy of that, would you please? Thanks so much. Nonetheless, moving on to Twitter, the Great Purge. Twitter has now suspended more than 70,000 accounts since Friday, and I'm sure many of you in the audience probably are some of those who have probably been purged. Obviously, starting with POTUS on Friday and continuing on down the line with the likes of Sidney Powell, with Michael Flynn, and various other accounts and that very prominent in the movement. So we get a little color around that here. It says in a Monday night blog post, Twitter lays out all the latest details of an historic purge that started with the suspension of President Trump and has escalated into the ban of tens of thousands of conservative voices. Or, as Twitter puts it, steps taken to protect the conversation on our service from attempts to incite violence, organize attacks, and share deliberately misleading information about the election outcome. Odd how none of those considerations emerged during the summer when U.S. cities were literally burning as a result of countless violent protests and frequent riots. But hey, we digress. Or even, what about the old ISIS folks and beheadings? I'm sure that's totally cool, right? Jack? In any case, in Twitter's own delightfully ironic words, it's important to be transparent about all of this work as the U.S. presidential inauguration on January 20th, 2021 approaches, which is probably a good idea in the aftermath of the biggest censorship purge in Twitter history, one which sent Twitter stock tumbling. So this is how Twitter justifies the purge. We've been clear that we will take strong enforcement action on behavior that has the potential to lead to offline harm. Given the violent events in D.C. and an increased risk of harm, we begin permanently suspending thousands of accounts that were primarily dedicated to sharing QAnon content on Friday afternoon. Oh, now I see. Wrong think. Why so scared? Jack. And with tens of thousands of accounts suspended, most of them permanently banned or merely disappeared, it will hardly be a surprise that according to Twitter, more than 70,000 accounts have been suspended. What is the justification? Well, these accounts were engaged in sharing harmful QAnon-associated content at scale and were primarily dedicated to the propagation of this conspiracy theory across the service. No double standards here whatsoever. But now we find out, let's see, where'd I go? More in the full blog post below. Meanwhile, as Bank of America warned today and as traders clearly agreed, Twitter, Twatter, whatever the hell you want to call it, Bluebird, now faces the risk of wholesale churn, in effect an exodus by the conservative community in response to this unprecedented crackdown, which could see tens of millions of MAUs gone, monthly annual users gone. More engagement risk for Twitter than Facebook. Donald Trump had 88 million followers on Twitter, the sixth most followed account, and on Facebook he had over 33 million followers. President Trump's follower count represents 47% of Twitter's daily active users. though clearly not all followers are DAUs, with his account averaging 34 tweets per day in 2020, up from 21 in 2019. Additionally, we see churn from the conservative community within Twitter as a modest first quarter DAU threat. However, Censure Tower suggests DAUs on Parler, a conservative-focused alternative, is roughly 130,000, about 0.37% of Twitter's U.S. daily average users, as of January 8th. Well, that has now since dropped to zero because obviously it's been deplatformed, thanks to these jackasses. Our call is that after some deactivation, news flow near term, strong political activists will stay on Twitter for other content. Yeah, I doubt it. Content risk and Section 230 back in focus. In June, the DOJ had a proposal to roll back some Section 230 protections, which specifies that internet companies are generally not liable for user-posted content. While a Democratic administration may be less focused on a significant reform of Section 230, recent events may make content legislation more likely. It says, while we think social platforms may welcome content guidelines, risks of a rollback of Section 230 include 1. Potential civil liability arising from victims of online content, and 2. Expense risk from need to increase content review capabilities. Facebook CEO Zuckerberg has been vocal in embracing an update to Section 230, while Twitter CEO Dorsey at Jack noted eroding the foundation of Section 230 could collapse how we communicate on the internet, leaving only a small number of giant and well-funded technology companies. And now we wait to find out just how extensive the conservative user churn has been. And of course, more on the statement from Twitter. No real need to do that. But obviously, one point to make here. So since last week, we've prohibited certain terms from surfacing in trends and search suggestions based on the following Twitter rules. Coordinated harmful activity, civic integrity, hateful conduct, glorification of violence, violent threats, and sensitive media. So for those of you who are still on Twitter, keep those in mind, would you, please? Because terms of service. We will also continue to prioritize reviewing and adding context to trends. Our goal is to help people see what's happening while ensuring that potentially confusing trends are presented with context. Because they got to help you think, folks. You don't know how to do that on your own. Fought spam and challenge potentially inauthentic accounts, all that good stuff. Yeah, whatever, Twitter. Your goose is cooked because we found out this morning it started off, they were down about 7%, progressed throughout the day. Zero Hedge tweeted this out, says, as Twitter tumbles 10%, Bank of America sees risk of churn as conservative community leaves the platform. I don't recall at the end of the day here where they actually finished up, but hey, let's keep the momentum going, folks. Get the hell off the platform, and let's watch them burn themselves to the ground. My opinion. Nonetheless, over to Facebook. Facebook in the business of purging all content mentioning Stop the Steal, because, again, wrong think. As the most unprecedented purge in recent U.S. history continues, shortly after Airbnb announced that it would ban guests associated with hate groups, it was unclear how Airbnb will determine who is and isn't associated with a hate group, although Airbnb was kind enough to inform its clients that it had already run background checks on all U.S. users when they first began using the platform. Oh, really? Where did they get that information from, Airbnb? On Monday, Facebook announced that it was removing all content mentioning Stop the Steal, a popular phrase among supporters of Trump's claims that the election was rigged. Yeah, because it was. You fact deniers. We are now removing content containing the phrase Stop the Steal under a coordinating harm policy from Facebook and Instagram. We removed the original Stop the Steal group in November and have continued to remove pages, groups, and events that violate any of our policies, including calls for violence. We've been allowing robust conversations related to the election outcome, and that will continue. But with continued attempts to organize events against the outcome of the U.S. presidential fraudulent election that can lead to violence and use of the term by those involved in Wednesday's violence in D.C., we're taking this additional step in the lead-up to the inauguration. It may take some time to scale up our enforcement of this new step, but we have already removed a significant number of posts. For your benefit, of course, folks. Keep that in mind. Facebook's just looking out for you. The latest crackdown comes amid a raft of emergency measures to stem what Facebook has called are incitements to violence on its platform in the lead up to President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. If only Facebook was as diligent in stopping the spread of incitement to violence in the lead up to this summer and fall's pervasive BLM protests and Antifa riots, it probably would have avoided much of the resulting accusations of political and ideological bias that have emerged in recent days. And again, I'll go back and think of ISIS and everything else and just some, beheadings and all that good stuff, but that's perfectly okay, right there, Zuckerberg? So here we get the full Facebook statement below. Our preparations ahead of Inauguration Day. Guy Rosen, VP of Integrity, and Monica Bickert, VP Global Policy Management. And of course, you can imagine this is a bunch of drivel. Now that the censorship and crackdowns of discrete words and phrases has officially begun, we wait to see what phrase will be deemed too violent next and is deleted out of existence. So, welcome to 1984, folks, where history is rewritten and there are just some words you cannot use. And so, as a result of that, we find out how to reclaim the net. Over 40 million people flocked to Gab after big tech censorship spree. And gee, you think, who would have thunk that might not happen? One of the last bastions of free speech out there in terms of platforms, and yes, we have seen unprecedented growth. For those of you on Gab, congratulations for getting over there, albeit a little bit late. But yes, in the last several days, you've heard me talk about this, that prior to Friday, we were on an upward march of about 60,000 users added per day for the last several days. Once about Sunday time frame hit, it was about 600,000, and that has increased exponentially, and yes, they are scaling up, so bear with us. It's going to take a little bit of time to inject a few more servers and get scaled up. And if you missed the beginning of the broadcast, keep in mind, yes, there's some stuff going on behind the scenes. Cloudflare was down here today for a period of time, causing issues. And so all of this stuff obviously plays an effect. And if you got slow page loads, and that, bear with them. It's going to take a little bit to get scaled up. So Gab is adding more servers to cope with the load. Gab.com, a censorship-free social network, claims traffic has increased by over 750% over the past few days, following Trump's permanent or indefinite suspension from most mainstream social media platforms. Despite the multiple suppression attempts, Gab.com is thriving. And yes, it is. Our traffic is up 753% in the past 24 hours, tens of millions of visits, Gab.com said after being asked about the slow loading speed. The company is adding more servers to handle the increased traffic. Gab says it has received over 40 million visits in the last week. And so there you see that in very short order, Gab will be bigger than the entire legacy media combined. The Mockingbird media no longer has any power. 37.5 million visits. Yeah, don't think for a second here, folks, that the attacks will not pick up. They do not like the fact that they are losing and have lost control at this point. Lost it. Gab has founded in 2017. The site does not censor free speech. In fact, it allows all legal content apart from pornography. Like mainstream social media platforms, Gab.com does not allow threats of violence and illegal content, but that did not stop Google and Apple from banning the app from the Play Store and App Store. And of course, mind you, you've heard me talk about this. This was over 2 years ago after the Pittsburgh shooting where all of that took place, and they were deplatformed off of just about everything and have had to rebuild, up to and including even commercial transactions and that are no longer processed through the likes of Visa and MasterCard. On Friday, the three big tech companies took similar action against Parler, another Twitter alternative that has promised to remain censorship-free. Since its launch in 2017, Gab has had to push back against multiple suppression attempts. However, it has managed to find ways to thrive. The platform has its own physical servers and does not rely on cloud hosting companies. And so, yes, on top of that, like we said before, Gab TV has actually kicked off their increasing capacity on that site as well, and it is user financed. So every one of you is not a product of the Twitters, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, net, where they make money and monetize you because it's a free service to us. No, that's not how it works on Gab. You actually provide the donations to make everything work and run and get the servers net in place. So if you get over to Gab, consider donating to Torba and Company. And out of National File. So again, continued fallout and blowback, big tech exodus. Gab reportedly receiving thousands of resumes from Silicon Valley employees as Facebook, Twitter stock prices plunge. Who'd have thunk? You mean there might actually be some folks who don't necessarily agree with Big Mike stepping in and giving the edict to big tech to start wielding the banhammer? Who'd have thunk? Nonetheless, free speech social media platform Gab.com is reportedly receiving requests from thousands of people employed in the Silicon Valley tech industry as the website explodes in popularity amidst the latest wave of censorious new policies deployed by fringe left executives at big tech monopolies such as Facebook and Twitter. The official Gab Twitter account first reported over the weekend that the company was receiving requests for employment from large numbers of employees in the tech industry. Silicon Valley should see our inbox right now. Looks like half of their employees want to leave and come work for Gab. Panic in Silicon Valley? And there it says Silicon Valley should see our inbox right now. Yep. Panic in SV. Yep. Gab further elaborated on the news in a follow-up tweet. Says we are getting resumes from senior-level employees at big tech companies, hearing that many people are putting in their 2 weeks too. Internal civil war among staff and executives. Panic in Silicon Valley. The house of cards falls. The exodus has begun. Silicon Valley, yeah, still the same there. All right. So continuing on, says most recently, Gab revealed on Monday that the numbers of people seeking to leave their jobs in big tech and find employment at Gab had swelled into the thousands, stating, I think half of Silicon Valley just reached out looking for a job. I'm not joking. It's thousands of people. Panic in the Valley. We will be hiring American citizens. We'll get back to folks as soon as we are able to. And keep in mind that the folks over at Facebook and Twitter like to hire the H-1B visa type folks. So keep that in mind. Over the weekend, Gab fulfilled the promise of founder and CEO Andrew Torba to add an additional 10 servers to the website in an effort to handle the tremendous influx in traffic seen over the past few days. My guesses are probably going to have to triple that. But as National File reported, Gab had previously promised to upgrade the server system after reportedly speaking with President Donald Trump's team about a possible move to the platform after last week's Facebook and Twitter purge. Both Twitter and Facebook have seen stock prices plunge after fanatically purging non-liberal content from their websites. So, again, folks, thinking of what our favorite Anon has traditionally says, we are watching the destruction of the old guard. And rightfully so. They have outlasted their usefulness. They will go by the dustbin of history like MySpace. Bye-bye. See ya. And out of Centipede Nation, Glenn Greenwald. 0 people arrested in connection with the Capitol invasion were active users of Parler. So, perhaps the Anon or whoever it was that decided to troll and lift a whole bunch of data out of Parler, the multiple terabytes of data. Well, maybe it was for naught. Who knows? Glenn Greenwald had this in a thread, and it says the ACLU and New York Times on why the union of Silicon Valley monopolies, Apple, Google, and Amazon, to remove Parler from the internet is so problematic. It says while ACLU is largely just a liberal pressure group now, they still have some real civil liberty lawyers. And the thing that they highlight out of the New York Times article says, but he said Parler's situation was troubling. That was because Apple's and Google's removal of Parler from their app stores and Amazon's halting its web hosting went beyond what Twitter or Facebook do when they curtail a user's account or their posts, he said. I think we should recognize the importance of neutrality when we're talking about the infrastructure of the internet, he said. And I'll pause right there and think about an article that also came through here this evening talking about world leaders saying the very same thing, that perhaps, Silicon Valley maybe wields just a little bit too much power. But, folks, we kind of already knew that. Because at the end of the day, our government is not stationed in D.C. Oh, no. The government is situated in the likes of Silicon Valley. Wag the dog, folks. Who owns whom at this point, right? And of course, we also saw big banksters and everybody else pile on today as Congress met and decided to start censoring various congressmen and senators and that who went against the grain and want to kick them out of Congress. All that BS. Tech monopolies, Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon have more concentrated wealth and power than any in history. They have used brute force 3 times in 3 months to manipulate U.S. politics, censoring New York Post, banning Trump, and destroying Parler. And liberals are overwhelmingly supportive. Well, maybe not quite so fast, Greenwald, if Gab says is true, but maybe that's just a few closet conservatives that happen to be hidey-holed in these institutions. I don't know. Continuing on, says that these Silicon Valley monopolies are grave menaces to political freedom and economic well-being is not a right-wing view. The most comprehensive report warning of these dangers was issued 3 months ago by a Democratic House subcommittee. And read this. And here we got out of Ars Technica, House, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google have monopoly power. And of course, thinking along those lines, we already know that the DOJ, along with some other 3-letter alphabet agencies, already have antitrust suits against many of these. Whether it be for their ad revenues net, where you get the likes of Google and Facebook who have colluded to basically put a stranglehold on the market and everything else. And then, of course, you've got the various AGs of all 50 states also piling into that. So, continuing on Greenwald's thread, it says, authoritarians never believe they're authoritarians, no matter how much censorship, surveillance, jingoism, and imprisonment they demand. They tell themselves their enemies are so uniquely evil and dangerous, terrorists, that anything done in the name of fighting them is noble. Do you know how many of these people arrested in connection with the Capitol invasion were active users of Parler? 0. The planning was largely done on Facebook. This is all a bullshit pretext for silencing competitors on ideological grounds. Just the start. And so he continues, says, for those asking the basis for the last claim, I spent the weekend reporting on the removal of Parler from the internet, including reviewing lots of documents and interviewing people associated with the companies involved, including Parler. The article will be up shortly. And he continues, says Silicon Valley defenders, if you don't like big tech censorship, just start your own social media platform with rules you want. Parler, okay, we did. We're the country's most popular app. Amazon, Apple, Google, we're uniting to take you off the internet with our monopoly power. Bye-bye. And so he continues, says, I wonder how many people subserviently cheering Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, and Google billionaires for destroying Parler, A, have ever been on Parler, B, know anything about it besides what CNN and NBC censors have shown them, and C, compared the hate speech there to what's on Facebook and YouTube. And by the way, how many bots are on Facebook and Twitter versus some of these others? Well, there are absolutely 0 on Gab at this point. I can't say for Parler. Mind you, at this point they're defunct until they get their stuff back in order. Greenwald continues, says Amazon, which already has a $600 million contract to provide services to the CIA and is desperately bidding to make that far more, is deeply opposed to violence and fascism. Jeff Bezos will use his monopoly power to make the world better. And there we see the article out of the LA Times there, says CIA plans to spend billions on cloud computing with multiple tech giants. So there you go. As in the words of Glenn Greenwald, formerly of The Intercept, who himself had been censored and had some of his articles net choked here prior to the election. And so we continue. On the path of what is going on the Hill, obviously this week begins what the unhinged Nancy Pelosi would like to do if we can't get them by the 25th Amendment, giving VP Pence 24 hours to respond. Then certainly they've already got the articles drawn up. And so the House Republicans to call for Trump censure to avoid Democrats' rushed impeachment, damaging our democracy. Says in seeking his removal for quote-unquote incitement, legal scholar and constitutional expert Jonathan Turley warned earlier the Dems would gut not only the impeachment standard, but free speech, all in a mad rush to remove President Trump just days before the end of his term. And of course, you've heard me explain that that probably is not going to happen because the Senate themselves do not even meet for any regular business until the 19th. So the mad rush would be for naught to get him out by the 20th. At the end of the day, all of this would be to curtail somebody like DJT from ever running for office again. That's the crux of the matter. Says Turley noted specifically that Congress is about to seek the impeachment of a president for a speech that is protected under the First Amendment. It would create precedent for the impeachment of any president who can be blamed for the violent acts of others after the use of reckless or inflammatory language. Nevertheless, on the heels of Vice President Pence's confirmation this evening that he pledges to work with Trump through the end of his term, thus confirming earlier reports that he would not acquiesce to Speaker Pelosi's demands that he invoke the 25th Amendment, it appears House Dems are raring to go on an impeachment vote on Wednesday. Screw going through all the committees and all that jazz that we did back in January last year. Let's just cut to the chase and get it done, huh? Says as Turley noted further on Fox News this evening, while remarking on the Dems' apparent rush to get this done, says they are suggesting impeaching a president over a speech that many of us called reckless. But it's a type of vicarious impeachment in the sense that he doesn't call for violence in his speech. And he in fact tells his followers to be peaceful. He says the reason they should go to the Capitol is to support members who are challenging the election and to encourage other members to join them. So the speech itself would not meet any definition as a criminal matter of incitement. Which brings us to an interesting potential pivot by House GOP members that was elaborated by Republican New York State Congressman Tom Reed, who wrote in a New York Times op-ed, "If we make the wrong decision in holding the president accountable, it could damage our democracy," somewhat echoing Turley's warnings. But Reed, while condemning the president's speech, has an option that, while unpleasant, is not as draconian as the Democrats' blood-baying needs. Reed begins by noting that this is in no way reduces the wrongdoing. All responsible parties, including President Trump, must face justice. Oh, really? And again, echoing Turley's constitutional-based warnings, Reed states that, while the president's words were unwise, intemperate, and wrong, they may not qualify as incitement, and an impeachment on the grounds that they do will inevitably erode the norms around what may be considered constitutionally protected speech. Reed goes on to note that a full impeachment hearing would delay much-needed efforts to tackle the nation's COVID-19 crisis and furthermore would stymie any effort at unity in a nation that is tearing itself apart. Unity? No. Not gonna happen, folks. We are not going to acquiesce or fold in to any of the shenanigans and BS on their side. Ain't gonna happen. We cannot give credibility to the belief that Washington chooses to hold people accountable only for mere political advantage, especially to the detriment of the Constitution. And so Reed offers an alternative. Says, I implore our congressional leaders and Mr. Biden to take a moment to consider what is at stake. Work with us on constitutionally viable alternatives to ensure that no individual is above the law. Is that a true statement? Is that for real? I can't help but laugh. You know, this two-tiered just us system, huh? Such options include censure. I intend to join with my House colleagues in the introduction of a censure resolution Tuesday to ensure accountability occurs without delay for the events of January 6th. We must also look at alternatives that could allow Congress to bar Mr. Trump from holding federal office in the future. In the case of censure, this would be the first time for a president since the Senate censured Andrew Jackson in 1834, and the offer of barring him from office likely meets the real desires of Dems to ouster Trump from a run in 2024. Call it a quid pro quo. Reed concludes, "We cannot and should not support a rushed, divisive action simply because the emotions of the moment demand it. That is not the American way." The American way, eh? Due process? Innocent until proven guilty? We can only imagine the Squad's response to this offer from the GOP. Says the question is, will Pelosi fold to it? This is her last term, after all, and she must know, as Turley warned, this rushed impeachment could tarnish her legacy just as much as she hopes to tarnish Trump's. So, yeah, there's that. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to flash this up here, but behind the scenes, having been through the Federalist Papers many a time before, I decided to do a little digging on some of the language that is in the Federalist Papers, and I landed on something very, very interesting here. Federalist Paper number 10. The same subject continued, the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. And so, I wonder how this might actually backfire on them. Because, obviously, we have plenty of cases where we saw true blue incitement from our Democratic friends, right, Maxine Waters, on how many occasions? And Nancy Pelosi? So out of Federalist number 10, I'm going to read this paragraph. It says, the latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere, brought into different degrees of activity, according to the different circumstances of civil society. Now hold that thought. Civil society. Are we really civil at this point? A zeal for different opinions concerning religion, concerning government, and many other points, as well of speculation as of practice, an attachment to different leaders ambitiously contending for preeminence and power, or to persons of other descriptions whose fortunes have been interesting to the human passions, have, in turn, divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. But the most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. And that's where I'll cut it right there, because it does get into the whole property side of things. But nonetheless, you understand here that these are the inflamed passions, the frivolity of all of this at the end of the day. This is exactly what our founders were talking about in Federalist number 10, this sort of bullshit that they are going to try and foist upon us. They don't care about facts and data. They care about their fanciful passions, period. And because it's politically expedient for them in gaining points. Screw that crap. And last but not least on the night, we get into this. POTUS has kicked out an emergency declaration for the lead-up to the inauguration now on the 20th. And this is rather interesting and perhaps maybe even a bit perplexing. I'll touch upon that here once I read through this. So this came out here on the 11th. It says, today, President Donald J. Trump declared that emergency exists in the District of Columbia and ordered federal assistance to supplement the district's response efforts due to the emergency conditions resulting from the 59th presidential inauguration from January 11th to January 24th, 2021. The President's action authorizes the Department of Homeland Security, Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to coordinate all disaster relief efforts which have the purpose of alleviating the hardship and suffering caused by the emergency on the local population, and to provide appropriate assistance for required emergency measures, authorized under Title V of the Stafford Act, to save lives and to protect property and public health and safety, and to lessen or avert the threat of a catastrophe in the District of Columbia. Specifically, FEMA is authorized to identify, mobilize, and provide at its discretion equipment and resources necessary to alleviate the impacts of the emergency. Emergency protective measures limited to direct federal assistance will be provided at 100% federal funding. Pete Gaynor, Administrator, FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, named Thomas J. Fargione as the Federal Coordinating Officer for Federal Recovery Operations in the affected area. For further information, media should contact the FEMA News Desk at the number provided and the FEMA News at fema.dhs.gov. So, very, very interesting. And of course, if you paid attention to the headlines today, you know that the National Guard has already got boots on the ground to the tune of about 6,000 or so in D.C. That headline was later updated throughout the day to potentially drum up to about 15,000, so more than double. And so it begs the question as to why. Because at the end of the day, again, go back and listen to what POTUS said about all this incitement and BS. There was no incitement. If any Trump-related folks would even think to be in D.C. on the inauguration, obviously I would expect that they would probably be fairly peaceful in that regard. So, is there something more to this? That is the question. And of course, perhaps maybe we get a little extra color around that. In that, Zero Hedge kicked this out by tweet today. It says FBI says armed protests being planned at all 50 state capitals, Washington, D.C., ahead of Biden's January 20th inauguration, according to ABC News, reporter on Twitter. And that is absolutely true. I do have behind the scenes here some information and the groups in that are helping to coordinate some of that stuff in 50 of the state capitals. However, they do say that it is supposed to be armed, but they are not going to be chambered, apparently, according to the rules that they're setting forth. So, again, is this a trap? I've heard people say, hey, this could be an ugly trap. I don't know. But nonetheless, I bring it to your attention. Perhaps this is what this is all leading towards, and we'll have to see how this fares. So, that is going to do it for the broadcast this evening. And as always, I like to conclude with this. Let's finish this. And I think perhaps maybe tomorrow we will find out via POTUS. I believe he's supposed to be down in Texas, and we'll actually have a presser and that down there, so look for that on RSBN. I think earlier in the day today he was supposed to go live around 2. That shifted a little bit and then eventually got pushed to tomorrow. So stick around and we'll look for that tomorrow over on RSBN. So, like I said, that is going to do it for this broadcast this evening. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll have a lot more to say about the goings-on here with Big Tech, the fallout with Pelosi, and what these yin-yangs are doing up on the Hill. We'll have a lot more to say about that here in coming days, so stick around. We'll see you soon. Take care. God bless, everybody.